Okay, let's unpack this. If you just look at the headlines, it feels like we're living through this single unified AI boom, where wealth creation and tech acceleration are pretty much the only stories. But if you actually peer underneath that, we're living through what feels like two separate and deeply conflicting economies right now.
That is the core paradox.
Yeah.
And it's what we're really here to synthesize today. On one side, you've got the soaring heights of the AI capital market, the sky-high private market valuations, the just astonishing velocity of capital, and it's all concentrated in a few mega-cap tech firms. But then on the other hand, there's this structural physical fragility that's developing right beneath the surface of the broader economy.
Right. And so our mission today is to move way beyond that simple, hype versus bust narrative that you see everywhere in the tech press. We really need to look at what happens when this abstract computational power AI crashes into material reality. We're synthesizing insights from market veterans like Joe Weisenthal, who focuses so intensely on the physical and financial plumbing, and then also some critical voices who are dissecting AI's impact on labor and culture.
And this matters to you because it's not just an abstract stock story for, Wall Street traders. This is fundamental economics. It impacts everything from how we power our cities to how we hire our workforce. We're tracking how this huge concentrated capital allocation is affecting the cost of building a house right now, or the structural quality of the jobs available. And I mean, even the fundamental way that we process information as a society.
Exactly. You have to look at the physical inputs, the actual pipes and the power lines, not just the algorithms and the code. We're going to explore how AI's physical thirst is actually crowding out traditional economic activity.
And that physical focus is so critical because the AI investment frenzy, while it's fueled by, zeros and ones, is intensely material in what it demands. It needs concrete, it needs steel, and just massive amounts of energy.
Let's start with the money then, because the speed of that capital accumulation is what makes the material constraints so aggressive. The stock market, especially big tech, and of course chip makers like NVIDIA, it functions as an accelerant here, takes all this enthusiasm, which is often, purely speculative, and it translates it instantly into these massive investment decisions. So it amplifies both the current boom and, well, the future potential bust.
The sheer velocity of capital in the private market it's truly staggering. I mean, it surpasses anything we saw even in the late 90s. And back then, accounting standards were arguably a lot looser. Just look at the numbers we've gathered. Take the AI coding startup Cursor. It's not even a household name yet. But it managed to raise $2.3 billion in a single funding round. And that instantly gave it a valuation of $29.3 billion.
That is just an incredible commitment of capital. And it's based primarily on future perceived utility, not current revenue. But that velocity is getting even faster. Thinking Machines Lab, which was founded by a former OpenAI executive, Miro Murati, well, it's reportedly in talks for a $50 billion valuation. What's absolutely mind-boggling is that this company launched less than a year ago.
It isn't just the speed, it's the concentration of value based on a concept. And, to put that $50 billion valuation into some historical perspective,
Right.
just think about how long it took some of the biggest tech giants to reach that kind of market cap. For companies built on, concrete business models like Google or Facebook, hitting that mark took years, often after multiple rounds of proven growth and demonstrated market dominance. Thinking Machines Lab is achieving this velocity almost entirely based on the intellectual capital of one executive and the talent she managed to attract.
Yeah, it really speaks to this idea that the AI market is functioning as a kind of winner-take-all environment. The perception of elite talent and proprietary algorithms, even more than immediate revenue, that's what justifies these astronomical valuations almost overnight. It's a velocity story unlike any other.
And it's this velocity that's making the bubble sentiment so pronounced among market experts. Dirk Willer, he is Citi's global head of macro strategy, he didn't hedge his language at all. He just clearly stated the AI market is in bubble territory. And he pinpointed the beginning of this phase with precision timing based on market indicators way back in May.
And the analysis from Paul Kudrowski, it takes that concern and just compounds it. He describes the AI market as being every bubble all rolled into one. So you've got the familiar speculative tech element, sure, but now it's overlaid with this massive real estate expansion, the land acquisition and construction for data centers, and then the risks that come with these increasingly exotic financing structures being put in place to fund all this Capex. When you mix that cocktail, the risk profile, it just becomes systemic. It becomes compound and affects sectors that traditionally had nothing to do with Silicon Valley.
That's precisely why the materialist critique is so timely. It recognizes that the enormous required capital expenditure is what elevates that systemic risk. And that brings us directly to Weisenthal's central thesis, which connects this financial frenzy to physical structural fragility in the wider economy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Weisenthal argues that this aggressive AI build-out, it's not just spending money, it is creating systemic fragility by monopolizing physical resources. It's essentially crowding out the rest of the economy. It's an immediate demand for materials that you just can't instantly manufacture.
That is the key distinction. The demand from data centers isn't for like generalized capital or off-the-shelf equipment. No, it's for highly specialized physical capital. And critically, the big tech players building these centers are willing and able to pay top dollar, often a huge premium, to secure it globally. This creates genuine, tangible supply shortages across foundational industrial sectors.
Okay, so give us some specifics. What are the material constraints that AI's physical thirst is imposing on, Main Street?
The primary bottlenecks, they revolve entirely around power and cooling infrastructure. Data centers require not just a lot of power, but constant, reliable power. And that translates into this aggressive, concentrated demand for highly specialized electrical gear. We're talking about massive high-voltage transformers, crucial switch gear that directs power flow, and the incredibly complex cooling systems you need to manage the heat generated by thousands of stacked GPUs.
And these aren't items you can just, pick up at a local industrial supply store. What are the typical lead times we're seeing, and how has the AI demand made them worse?
Well, historically, securing a high-voltage specialized transformer for a large industrial or utility project, that might take 6 to 9 months. In the current climate, though, fueled by data center demand, those lead times have stretched dramatically. We are seeing quotes of 18 months to 2 years, sometimes even longer, especially for custom specifications. This strain on the global supply chain, which is concentrated in just a few key manufacturers, it imposes these significant delays and cost pressures globally.
So the data center build isn't just raising the price of copper. It is literally starving other non-tech sectors of the components they need.
Precisely. It creates what's known as the crowding out effect in its most physical sense. Imagine a local hospital trying to upgrade its critical infrastructure, or a municipal utility that needs to replace an aging transformer to ensure the local grid is resilient, or maybe a new residential housing development waiting for power hookups. They all face amplified costs and delays because the hyper-funded AI sector is aggressively securing those exact same specialized industrial inputs. And they're often paying a premium that smaller traditional infrastructure projects just can't match.
So this isn't just about delayed profit. This is about delaying fundamental economic activity.
That's why Weisenthal calls this a form of deferred economic fragility. The money is flowing into the AI sector now, so it gives this illusion of health. But the physical economy housing, small manufacturing, public utility upgrades is creaking under the weight of this concentrated demand. Their projects are delayed, their costs spiral, and necessary maintenance gets put off. The fragility of the broader base is accumulating, only to be exposed later when these projects finally hit the market at inflated costs. Or, even worse, when the AG infrastructure fails.
And it's not just the static components of the electrical grid. The source material also flags the competition for gas turbines. Why are those so critical to data centers, and how does that competition impact something like, say, our climate goals?
Gas turbines are essential for 2 reasons. 1, constant reliable power generation. Or 2, most commonly, as critical backup systems for these massive data centers. If a center loses power for even a few minutes, the sudden drop in cooling can cause hardware failures, massive data loss. So redundancy is absolutely non-negotiable. By competing so aggressively for the supply of this heavy-duty industrial power generation equipment, the AI build-out is creating a really sharp tension.
Tension with who?
Tension with traditional heavy manufacturing, which also requires these for stable operations. And crucially, tension with the necessary capital expenditures required for the global clean energy transition. Turbines that could be used for decentralized power or transition projects are instead locked into backup roles for dedicated AI infrastructure. It's a zero-sum capital allocation process happening in the physical world, where the needs of computational abstraction are winning out against the needs of industrial and environmental stability.
This inherent physical commitment, it leads us directly to concentration risk and the unique way a potential AI bust might play out, which sounds dramatically different from past tech collapses.
That's the core risk. Value is concentrated in the hands of a few big tech companies that can afford to secure the global chip supply. The GPUs, the TPUs, locking up all these essential industrial inputs. But when we look at the possibility of a downturn, we have to consider the risk of stranded assets.
Right. We're all familiar with the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, where the financial pain was sharp, but the infrastructure left behind, all that excess fiber optic cable was eventually reused or generalized. Why is AI infrastructure different?
That's the key difference. While excess fiber was generalized and, reusable, modern AI infrastructure requires intense, sometimes even customized specialization. It demands massive bespoke power and cooling tailored precisely for specific chip architectures, whether it's NVIDIA's or a competitor's. These systems are optimized for the heat and density of current generation AI chips.
So if the economic utility of these current AI models fails to materialize, or if, say, rapid technological evolution makes them obsolete, like a new chip architecture emerges that's 10 times more efficient but needs a different cooling solution, what happens to the existing data center?
Those physical assets,
Yeah.
the transformers, the specific cooling loops, the specialized power distribution units, they may become extremely difficult and costly to repurpose. Unlike general warehousing space or generic office buildings, this infrastructure is engineered for one specific use case. The economic pain of a bust, therefore, isn't just a financial write-down on paper. It becomes a persistent structural drag on the economy because you have these multi-billion-dollar stranded, highly specialized assets that you can't easily convert to other uses.
So the physical crowding out of inputs for the rest of the economy, followed by the risk of stranded physical assets if the boom ends, that imposes a material, unavoidable lag on any recovery. This material reality is what Weisenthal insists we have to grasp.
Indeed, this boom is deeply rooted in physical commitment, and that commitment persists long after the financial premium and the speculative enthusiasm have just evaporated.
Okay, let's pivot now from the material reality of the hardware to the human reality of labor and the workforce. The immediate assumption during an AI boom is, widespread, inevitable job displacement. But the analysis we have suggests a much more nuanced picture. It's centered not just on the quantity of jobs, but fundamentally on their quality and, well, who benefits from the new tools.
That's right. And before we dive into job quality, we have to address the current skepticism around overall economic productivity. Joe Weisenthal expresses considerable doubt that AI tools had yet delivered any measurable, broad-based productivity gains across the entire economy.
Why the skepticism? I mean, isn't the whole point of this massive investment to make everyone faster and more efficient?
It is, but there's a lag. Many organizations are experimenting, but sometimes AI adoption is driven more by the perceived necessity of reducing costs rather than a proven efficiency increase. We've seen instances where AI is used more as a justification for headcount reductions, a financial move, than as a genuine productivity enabler that results in, say, 10% more output per hour across the board. Plus, historically, it takes decades for true infrastructure technology like electricity or the internal combustion engine to fully rewire the economy and actually register in national productivity statistics. We are likely in that early, chaotic investment phase.
That brings us to David Otter's compelling argument. Otter has a history of studying the destructive forces of technology and trade like the China shock on the labor market. But he suggests that AI could potentially reverse or at least mitigate the very problems created by earlier computerization.
The key to Otter's argument lies in distinguishing between two types of knowledge: formal and tacit knowledge. Traditional computerization, starting in the 80s and 90s, automated formal knowledge.
Okay. Define formal knowledge for us in this context.
Formal knowledge is basically codified procedures. Think of repeatable, rule-based tasks, data entry, bookkeeping, typing, assembly line work that could be easily reduced to a step-by-step algorithm. Automating this formalized work caused job polarization, it hollowed out the middle-skill jobs, the administrative assistants and factory workers, and it led to growth only at the high skill, so management and creative, and low skill, so service, ends.
So the argument is that AI, particularly large language models, operates differently because it can handle tacit knowledge. The nuance, the judgment, the context required in real-world, non-codifiable decision-making.
Exactly. Tacit knowledge is the unwritten expertise. It's the gut feeling a doctor has about a diagnosis, or the nuanced language a lawyer uses in a brief, or the judgment a seasoned paralegal uses when they're reviewing documents. AI can interact with and synthesize this human judgment because it processes these vast amounts of contextual, unstructured data.
And this ability to assist with tacit knowledge is what makes AI a tool for expertise. It's capable of extending the range and capabilities of people who already have existing training and judgment rather than just replacing them entirely.
And research supports this powerful idea of leveling up. It's less about replacing the expert
Right.
and more about making a broader swath of the workforce capable of functioning at a higher baseline.
The study on early ChatGPT use in professional writing is a standout example of this leveling effect. They found that for tasks like composing a short business memo, the tool significantly reduced the time it took to do the work. It cut it from about 30 minutes down to around 18 minutes, and it improved the quality of the output overall.
But the most powerful result, the one that really excites researchers like Otter, was that the least capable workers who were using the AI tool, they performed just as well, and sometimes even better, than the median worker who was performing the task without the tool. It essentially acted as a high-powered, universally available tutor.
That leveling effect has massive societal implications because it extends the range of professional practice. It means people who aren't necessarily the absolute elite can achieve high-quality work, which could potentially improve access to critical services.
Think about a nurse practitioner in a remote area, supported by AI for complex diagnostic data synthesis, allowing them to handle cases that were previously reserved for specialists. Or paralegals leveraging AI for advanced document generation and synthesis. Or, in the software world, developers using advanced tools like Cursor.
The case of Cursor highlights this leveling and extending effect perfectly in a high-skilled field. The CEO of Cursor noted that their customers, professional developers at places like NVIDIA, Salesforce, PwC, were getting 40% more work done, measured by key metrics.
And we should quickly define that metric for you listening. They measured pull requests merged. A pull request is essentially when a software developer proposes changes to the main codebase. Merging it means the changes have been approved, reviewed, and integrated into the project. A 40% increase in that metric is a real measurable increase in the speed and quality of integrating new code. It shows AI coding is quickly becoming an enterprise play for existing skilled workers, making them more productive, not necessarily replacing them.
So on one hand, we have AI boosting the productivity of knowledge workers, leveraging their tacit skills. But on the other hand, the physical build-out we talked about earlier, the demand for data centers, is creating this massive, urgent demand for traditional skilled trades.
That contradiction is fascinating. The NVIDIA CEO, Jensen Huang, he explicitly stated that winning the market requires mountains of skilled labor. Mechanical engineers, electrical engineers.
And that underscores the current labor shortage in the trades. It highlights how even the backbone of the American economy, HVAC, plumbing, electric, solar contractors, are being targeted by frontier AI tools. We saw the example of Netick, a startup backed by Founders Fund that aims to equip these contractors with advanced AI.
Right, and Netick's CEO explained a critical market dynamic. Small businesses in these fields, they face high volatility and seasonality in demand. Their immediate priority is usually capacity and finding more human labor to handle the next surge in demand, not investing heavily in AI tools. That's why, initially, mid-market and large enterprises are the primary customers for these specific AI tools in the physical world. The core problem for the U.S. economy is still meeting this massive consumer demand, and that requires people with specialized hands-on skills.
So if AI tools continue to level up workers and extend the range of professional practice, it will inevitably lead to what Otter calls turf warfare.
Oh, this is a classic political economy struggle. A profession is defined not just by the skills it requires, but by its ability to certify its own members and decide who's qualified to practice and who's out. Established professions, doctors, lawyers, professors, they have a massive incentive to fiercely resist new practitioners whose skills are enabled or enhanced by AI, but who lack the traditional years of formal training.
The fight over nurse practitioners being resisted by the American Medical Association, limiting their autonomy even though they have the training, that's a perfect analog for what's going to happen in the AI age. They'll argue that the AI-assisted practitioner lacks the necessary judgment, even if the outcome data is superior.
And this is going to be a major, prolonged political and lobbying struggle over who gets to benefit from these productivity gains. Will the productivity be used to lower costs and increase access to services by broadening the professional base? Or will it be used to increase the margins of the existing, established professional class?
And this leads to that striking political and economic paradox we have to point out, which Weisenthal highlights. We now have many political and financial elites criticizing the failures of globalization, which, gutted blue-collar manufacturing jobs, while at the same time being enormously bullish on AI, which threatens to reorganize or replace white-collar jobs.
The cognitive dissonance is palpable. I mean, for decades, the consensus was that globalization and trade were inevitable, and that those manufacturing jobs just had to be sacrificed for cheaper goods. Now, we see those same voices embracing a new technology consensus that suggests the professional class's work must be reorganized or even replaced, also treated as this unstoppable natural force, like the weather or gravity. The narrative of inevitability is applied consistently, regardless of whose jobs are on the chopping block.
Let's transition now to the broader geopolitical and trade environment that frames this whole material build-out. We're seeing a significant shift away from the free trade consensus, primarily through the imposition of tariffs. And tariffs are playing a complex, frictional role here, adding uncertainty to a global economy that's already stressed by this concentrated AI demand.
That's a careful way to put it. Tariffs have not, on their own, caused massive systemic shortages in the way the AI build-out has caused component shortages. But they have significantly raised transactional costs and, maybe more damagingly, increased the uncertainty for businesses trying to reconfigure their global supply chains away from historical dependencies.
Right. And for a large industrial company making investment decisions, this is a huge problem. They operate on, what, a 7 to 10-year cycle for factory construction or major capital upgrades? What kind of structural friction do tariffs introduce?
The friction is the lack of forward guidance. Because tariffs are often annual announcements or renegotiation periods, these companies only have about 1 year of clear price visibility on their key inputs. You just can't commit billions of dollars to a long-term project if you have no certainty about what your core components will cost 3 years down the line. That uncertainty acts as a massive speed bump, slowing down investment and strategic supply chain realignment globally.
There are a few competing and highly sophisticated theories on the geopolitical strategy behind these tariffs. One suggests they are far more than just protectionism. They're a highly sophisticated, if risky, negotiating tactic.
This is the shock tactic theory, and it's a brilliant piece of analytical deduction. This theory posits that announcing high, broad tariffs is specifically designed to shock foreign central banks in Europe, Japan, and especially China into lowering their domestic interest rates to maintain export competitiveness.
Wait, but how does a U.S. tariff pressure a foreign central bank to lower its interest rates?
The mechanism is complex, but it's logical. So tariffs raise the cost of imported goods in the U.S. This puts upward pressure on U.S. inflation. To combat that inflation, the Federal Reserve might have to keep U.S. interest rates higher for longer. Higher U.S. rates make the dollar stronger, and if the dollar strengthens significantly, foreign currencies, the euro, the yen, the renminbi, they all depreciate relative to the dollar, which hurts those countries' export competitiveness.
I see. So the foreign central bank, fearing that U.S. tariffs combined with a strong dollar will cripple their export sector and slow their domestic economy, is essentially forced to react.
Exactly. They are pressured to lower their domestic interest rates to stimulate their economy and intentionally depreciate their own currency. The goal for the U.S. in this shock tactic theory is a cheaper dollar relative to foreign currencies, which effectively makes the tariff countries pay the cost of the tariff through currency manipulation. And it ensures the dollar remains the world's reserve currency, keeping U.S. borrowing rates low. It's an incredibly aggressive form of economic warfare.
It's compelling, but it does rely on an assumption of, absolute coordinated strategic thinking at the highest levels. Do all analysts buy into the idea that there is this clear, long game plan?
No. Critics argue that this theory may give a little too much credit for consistency. They question whether there is a consistent plan beyond unpredictability and vagueness. They point out that high-level tariff announcements often get rolled back or are implemented unevenly, which suggests a potential lack of sustained political appetite to actually unplug the international trading system. Even if the political rhetoric is highly protectionist, it suggests tactical chaos rather than some grand strategy.
Regardless of the immediate strategy, though, the long-term stakes are enormous. The geopolitical competition with China, coupled with declining U.S. industrial capabilities in critical sectors like advanced fabs and the aviation industry, it all poses long-term sovereignty and supply chain risks that tariffs alone just can't solve.
And AI's massive energy demand, it just accelerates this national competition for industrial dominance. Nations are racing to secure the power infrastructure and resources necessary to host these data centers globally. It is an industrial race because the infrastructure itself represents future economic power. Weisenthal flagged Europe and emerging markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Brazil as pivotal unknowns.
Why are those specific emerging markets in Europe so critical in this context?
Their orientation, whether they align politically and economically with the US, China, or form a third bloc, that will fundamentally shape global trade, industrial capacity, and access to key resources moving forward. If the U.S. can't reshore or friendshore key manufacturing capabilities, or if these nations choose to partner with competitors to build their own industrial base, the long-term material constraints we discussed in the AI sector will only get deeper.
So we've covered the structural, the material, the financial, and the labor risks that are embedded in the AI economy. But now we have to shift to what is perhaps the most profound and least discussed consequence of the digital age, a consequence that AI is aggressively accelerating: the underlying cognitive and cultural change in how we process and transmit knowledge.
This is where we shift focus entirely, from economics to intellectual crisis. We need to look at the work of Walter Ong, the Jesuit scholar who studied the history of human communication, specifically the transition from purely oral culture to print culture, and what he termed secondary orality.
This requires us to understand human communication history in three stages. Let's start with primary orality, which dominated preprint societies.
Primary orality is knowledge transmission solely by speech. It exists without any writing system at all. Because knowledge had to be remembered and recited, this culture was fundamentally aggregative rather than analytic. People couldn't just stop and dissect a sentence like we do when we're reading, so they relied heavily on repetition, cliches, and formulas.
Like the Homeric epics.
Precisely. Phrases like swift-footed Achilles or rosy-fingered dawn, they weren't just poetic flourishes, they were mnemonic devices. They helped the speaker construct the narrative on the fly, and they helped the audience remember the story. This culture was traditionalist, conservative, and it discouraged the abstract analytical thought we rely on today, because you couldn't detach the word from the speaker or the immediate moment.
Then came print culture, enabled by the printing press in the 1440s, which fixed the word in place on a page. And this shift it was revolutionary.
It was a fundamental cognitive break. Fixing the word allowed for precision, analytical rigor, abstract thought. It created the possibility of modern literary forms like the novel. And fundamentally, it required the human brain to engage in complex, sequential, logical processing. It standardized language and created the concept of objective knowledge separate from the speaker. The history of literacy, in fact, is argued to be the history of class struggle, with reading being a form of power that the elite initially sought to control.
And now we are in the third stage, secondary orality, driven by electronic media, social media, video, mass media, and now AI-generated content.
Secondary orality is the current state. It brings back many qualities of primary orality. A communal sense, that feeling of being connected to a large, instantaneous crowd, a concentration on the present moment, and the heavy use of formulas like political slogans, memes, and viral video formats. It feels emotional, communal, and immediate, just like primary orality.
But the key difference is that secondary orality uses writing and print for its infrastructure: the servers, the code, the written scripts that underpin the algorithms. It's an oral culture built on a literate foundation.
And this is where the intellectual crisis lies. McCormick argues that the shift to constant electronic input fundamentally rewires the logic engine of the human brain, making it less inclined toward complex sequential reasoning, the kind that print culture required. The public square now rewards loud one-upmanship, instant, emotionally charged content, and viral success over reasoned, complex, and lengthy debate.
That explains why intellectual honesty often loses out to formulaic repetition in modern political communication.
Exactly. Weisenthal applied this concept directly to politics, describing the figure of the post-literate president or leader who leverages formulaic repetition, the modern equivalent of that Homeric epithet. The rise of the meme and the slogan is the return of the formulaic epithet, designed to bypass analytical thought and land directly on emotional resonance.
Let's ground this in a modern example. Think about how a complex policy argument is disseminated versus a short video clip. A complex print-based analysis requires, 10 minutes of concentrated attention and sequential reading? The video or the meme delivers an emotional payload in 10 seconds, relying on repeated, known cultural formulas.
And the political consequences are stark. This shift means that the ability to process complex prose, which is necessary for understanding nuance in policy or distinguishing credible sources, is declining across the masses. If society can't handle complexity, it is left less capable of distinguishing reality from sophisticated fiction, leaving us, as one observer put it, in an hallucinatory dream world.
What's particularly striking is how this cognitive shift has become entrenched along class lines, linking back to our discussion of wealth concentration. Controlling the media effect and insulating yourself from its cognitive decay is now a class privilege.
It is a profound class divide of devices. While big tech CEOs and the so-called cognitive elite are focused on building AI models, they are reportedly sending their own children to private schools that aggressively ban electronic devices. They understand the detrimental cognitive effects of perpetual screen time and secondary orality on developing minds.
Meanwhile, the data shows the reverse for lower-income demographics.
Yes. Studies show that lower-income children spend significantly more time on screens, absorbing the non-analytical, emotionally charged nature of secondary orality. They're essentially suffering the cognitive consequence of the technology their elite counterparts are developing. This creates a deeply stratified cognitive system.
And this feeds directly into the argument that AI provides the final impetus to abolish education for the masses. Why invest the time, the resources, the effort in critical thinking and complex literacy when the simple task, the production of text or analysis, can just be outsourced to tools like ChatGPT?
The premise of mass public education was tied to national need. In the past, countries invested heavily in mass literacy because national power and military necessity demanded educated soldiers and workers. The rise of Prussia showed that better educated armies defeat larger, less educated ones. Today, if the elite believe AI can handle the complex analytical lifting, they no longer feel they need a critically educated workforce to uphold the system.
And we see this attitude reflected in elite sentiment across industries. CEOs are openly expressing excitement about AI creating workers who don't go on strike or ask for a pay raise. The ideal worker, in this view, is compliant, cheap, and relies entirely on the tool provided by the employer, reducing the need for human judgment and negotiation.
And the military reflects this intellectual outsourcing. National security strategies are increasingly basing their future dominance on achieving artificial general intelligence. This implies that traditional officer literacy, the ability to study and internalize complex strategists like Clausewitz or Sun Tzu, will soon be unnecessary because the machine will calculate the strategy. The intellectual rigor required for complex societal functions is being deemed redundant for the vast majority, reserved only for those who build and control the AI itself.
The ultimate fear here is that the ability to engage in complex thought, which is necessary to understand and critique the structural flaws we've identified, the crowding out, the concentration risk, the turf warfare, will simply atrophy in the general population.
The degradation of mass literacy is the foundation upon which political and economic power can be consolidated without resistance. If the population loses the cognitive tools required to process complex prose and identify logical inconsistencies, they lose the ability to organize effective critical resistance to these powerful, concentrated forces.
So let's bring this all together. We started with the paradox of the AI boom, this immense financial velocity versus a growing physical fragility. We've looked at the AI boom from the ground up, and we've identified two major structural weaknesses that are converging.
First, there's the economic critique from Weisenthal. The immense concentrated financial power of a few big tech firms is driving this aggressive, speculative capital expenditure. This is creating structural fragility by monopolizing physical resources like specialized electrical gear and power infrastructure, actively crowding out investment from the rest of the traditional economy. And this results in deferred economic fragility and risks massive, non-repurposable stranded assets in the event of a bust.
Second, the cultural critique, rooted in Ong and McCormack. This technology is accelerating a cognitive decline for the masses by pushing society further into secondary orality. It erodes mass literacy and the ability to process complex print-based thought. And that leads to a population less capable of critical analysis and distinguishing between reality and fiction, which is a necessary precondition for centralized control.
The core conclusion is that the immense wealth generated by a few big tech firms demanding specialized physical resources for abstract computational power, well, it's simultaneously undermining the physical stability of the traditional economy and eroding the intellectual rigor required to navigate or even resist this new, highly centralized world.
That leaves us with a critical and perhaps provocative question for you to consider as you process this deep dive. We learned that the history of literacy is the history of class power. If the new AI economy is characterized by a reliance on highly specialized physical infrastructure alongside a societal turn towards less analytical secondary orality, we have to ask, Does the physical crowding out of basic industrial materials, the transformers, the switchgear, the power lines needed for housing and public utilities, does that mirror an intellectual crowding out, where the cognitive space required for complex, print-based thought is disappearing, making critical resistance to these powerful, concentrated forces politically impossible?
The material reality is that the new economy is defined by who controls the power infrastructure. The cultural reality is defined by who retains the capacity for complex thought. When the two are concentrated in the hands of a few, what power is left for the masses? That is the structural challenge of the AI age.